Alright, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. So this video is going to mostly be about the Vintage Singleton format, the VS format. However, I will include a little bit of Commander. I'll show you the changes to the deck list and briefly discuss that, possibly go through a game or two. At the end, we'll see what kind of time we have. Anyway, this is the updated Vintage Singleton list that I am using. One of the insights that I had that seems really good is I really like Coveted Jewel in this deck, both because it's a huge payoff card for having a lot of colorless mana, like a Workshop, and also because it's a great Tinker target. And in general, what I found is that while, yeah, most of the time you'd probably rather Tinker for a Bolas' Citadel, unless you're low on life, Coveted Jewel probably is a win anyway, because for the most part, if you get this thing out, you draw 3 cards and have access to 3 extra mana. Basically a free Black Lotus every turn, plus an Ancestral Recall. Putting those 2 cards together has been a way to win the game of Magic since it was born. And, you know, this is a single card that does that, and usually it's going to be good enough to win the game for you. So I went ahead and just made that swap, and I've been pretty happy with it, as you'll see. Works out all right. Couple other cards in here. This is a new one. Tishana's Tidebinder. Seems really strong. I'm kind of testing it out. Currently don't have, I don't really have a good board sweeper in here, but I'm not sure that I need it. I do like the Tidebinder because it's a stifle on a 3/2 flash creature. It does also take away the abilities of a permanent. So if the stifle doesn't actually if it's reusable, like let's say somebody uses a Jace the Mind Sculptor, and then you play this and you stifle the effect, not only can you potentially just attack and kill it, but it actually prevents the card from being used while the Tidebinder remains in play. So what that means is that this card is an answer to the One Ring. So you can stifle the activated ability, and then they can slowly die while you hit them for 3, and the One Ring pings them over and over, which is kind of fun. So it also stifles things like Orcish Bowmasters, and it stops, like, Thalia, a Wasteland. Let me double check on that last one. Artifact, creature, or planeswalker. Counter up to 1 target activated or triggered ability. So it will stop a Wasteland. And then if it is an artifact, creature, or planeswalker, then it locks it down. So yeah, you can stop a Wasteland. So you can stop a lot of things. It's pretty nice. Even because it's the same stuff that a Stifle will happen, you can even stop like some like Flusterstorm or whatever. You can stop the replicating trigger, the Storm trigger rather, because it's a triggered ability. In addition to that, I'm running Dress Down, which is just a way to... It's a 2-mana flash card that kills all Urza Saga tokens. And this is just a nod to the format as it is. But, you know, it's a solid card, and it's 2 mana in cycles, basically. So you can stop an Orcish Bowmaster. You can stop yourself from dying to a Hull Breacher. Like, it turns things off. You have to be careful, of course, in this deck because we have creatures that have abilities. But the other trick that you can do with Dress Down that's kind of interesting is you can have a bunch of Duretti tokens, and then you can Dress Down and attack with them. So that might not come up. Probably never will come up, but it's interesting to keep in mind. And I've also increased the Duress, Thoughtseize, and Inquisition stuff package over here just to give me a little more defenses against, you know, scary stuff. I could potentially drop the Dress Down and just run like Hymn to Torok and maybe move the Dress Down into the sideboard. That is a thought, but for now I'll leave the Dress Down in the main. I think I can't remember if I flashed out my sideboard or not, but this is what I have here. It's just sort of a lot of cards that are good against blue, a little anti-white, some anti-red over here with the ironically the red cards are against blue, so little anti-red there, anti-blue stuff over here, I guess green here, and the Jitte maybe? I don't know. Stern Scolding is like pretty good against most things. And then a couple of targets for Karn to just grab. There might be an occasion where you need a Jitte. Lattice is a combo with Karn, and Voltaic Key with Karn is just another way to go get the to complete the Time Vault. This is basically my standard package of artifacts that I want to grab out of the sideboard, potentially. Although, it could change in the future, but we'll stick with it right now. So I want to run through these games. I think in these games, I don't think I had dress down. I think I had something else. I've been playing around with this slot, basically. There were a couple other small changes. If I do see any of the changes, like I don't think I had the bolt and the dress down and the fire ice. But I kind of like the changes now because I feel like actually there's a surprising number of creatures showing up in Vintage, just like cheap little value creatures like Bowmasters and such. And this feels a little bit better. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get into the games. So we'll take a look here. We'll take a look at some Vintage first. And we'll look at today. You can see I got crushed here, but I did pretty well. I mean, so I'll just go through the win, the 2 losses, and the win. And I think in the last game, it's quite the last game against Big Butt Bringus was awesome. The last set. So honestly, like all the wins were pretty enjoyable. I can't remember what happened in the losses. We'll take a look anyway. So this is one change. I did have Lelia in here. I decided to cut Lelia. I don't know. I'm back and forth on it. It's pretty good. It's a good card and everything. But just to get back to the build, I think Tashana's Tidebinder probably will be better. Also, being blue matters. So we'll see. But I feel like this became the Tidebinder, and I think that might be a better choice. But here we're just going to lead off with a nice top deck Duress, and I see, well, let's pause. Opponent's playing Luris, by the way, and I see, so they have Luris. It's been revealed. It's not in their hand yet. So they play their Wasteland here. I'm glad I didn't lead off with the city, but this is, by the way, why, because you want to hold back your better lands because of Wastelands. Now, unfortunately, if you haven't figured it out, I haven't found any opponents to play me in the Vintage Singleton format. I'm trying to sell this format to y'all, to my audience, to try to gin up some interest, because I think it's really interesting and fun. But I end up having to play these very narrow, like, ultra vintage decks in the format that I find to be kind of droll. I don't know, not droll. That's the wrong word. I find them to be a little bit well, it's not as fun to play against. Basically, they're so linear. Linear is the word, right? They're so straightforward that I mean, at least this here, my opponent's got some kind of a control thing going on, so it's a lot more interesting. But typically, all the control decks look very similar. It's like 4 Urza Saga, 4 Wastelands, and a Strip Mine, 4 Orcish Bowmasters, all the broken blue stuff, 8 Force of Wills, and whatever. So seeing something different here is kind of nice. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and run out the city here. And then I'm not going to play City Soul Ring. You might think this is a mistake. It's clearly not. My opponent is going to Wasteland me more than likely. So I need the Ancestral Recall. And also, I know that they only drew 1 card. So there's a chance that they drew a Force of Will. But if they drew a Force of Negation, I can get this Ancestral off. If they drew any other counterspell, basically I can't. But I'm going to Ancestral during upkeep and dig for more mana to make that Wasteland not so good. Hopefully. And I find, this is scary, I do not find any mana sources, so very nerve-wracking scenario here. And my opponent plays Saga, so we know that they've got 4 cards in hand plus a Saga. And then runs out a Merchant Scroll for Ancestral Recall. So we know exactly what our opponent's hand is. It's this, which means the coast is totally clear for Tinker. I do find a land, finally. And you can see here, like, Lelia just not being particularly stellar. So maybe it just doesn't matter. And we're going to Tinker directly into, yeah, Coveted Jewel for sure, right? And I Coveted Jewel, and look at Copy Artifact in my hand. So, gross. Yeah, Coveted Jewel is just bonkers beyond belief. I'm going to Ponder here. Set myself up a nice juicy counter spell. With the extra mana, I'll throw down a Time Vault, and I actually have to discard the hand size. You don't want your opponent discarding the hand size in Vintage. I throw away a Vandal Blast here because the game's almost over. Opponent's Wasteland here is completely pointless, so they're down to an Ancestral, which is a bit of a threat. Obviously, we've got that covered, and then an Unknown. So I'm going to go ahead and Strip Mine here and try and prompt out the Ancestral. or an activation of Saga, which is what I get. And remember, they're highly incentivized to make this token here because Coveted Jewels says that if they attack and do it unblocked, then they draw 3 cards and steal the jewel. Basically, you lose the game. So it's supposed to be a risky card, but I mean, how risky is this really, right? So now my opponent has these 4 cards plus 1 unknown. So they might have a Force of Will, but it's only going to be 1, and which means I only need 1 counter spell to win the game here, which I have. Let's get the key down. They do, in fact, have a Force of Will. I'm going to go ahead and remand here, and my opponent concedes. Now, you might say, well, why don't they let the remand resolve, put the Force of Will, so they exiled the repeal. Why don't they let the remand resolve, put the Force of Will back in their hand, Force of Will again using Ancestral? Sure, it sucks, but then they can attack with the token, steal my 2 Coveted Jewels, strip mine me, and basically win the game. And the answer is because Remand is targeting Manifold Key. So Manifold Key is going to go, so this is their hand exactly. So Manifold Key is going to pop back in my hand with 1 mana floating. I'm going to cast it, and then I'm going to untap Time Vault, and they're not going to get any more turns. So that's the reason why my opponent conceded there. And then we'll move on to game 2. That was against, what was that? Oh no, that was just it. My opponent lost against my Singleton deck and then actually logged out. All right, so John Cox here crushes me. I don't recall how. Oh yeah, it was mono white. I will actually explain. This was the game that made me realize I didn't have enough creature removal in my deck. As a matter of fact, I had, I think, none. And it completely hoses me. So my opponent plays what looks like good plays in Vintage, but and they're fine, but I'm very close to winning the game here. Just going to go ahead and grab a Time Vault or an extra mana source. So all I need to do is just like grab a Soul Ring here. Maybe. Oh, more than 1 spell each turn. That's actually pretty annoying. And then this thing can disenchant, so I've got to play around that. I'm playing around the Chancellor of the Annex that my opponent showed in the beginning of the game. So just go get Ancestral here, which I think is probably wrong. But I don't know. I feel like I may have made some errors here. My phone has Collector Oof too, and a Strip Mine's like brutal. And I just can't really seem to get anything going here. But all I have to do is clear their board, and I probably win this game. They're down to 2 cards in hand, right? This is an easy win. So I'm going to Vampiric Tutor and clear their board, get some removal. Except when I Vampiric Tutor, what I realize is the only removal in my deck is the ready. I have no removal at all. And that, incidentally, is how I lose both games. Like, it's the same shit. I had no removal in my deck. I don't know how I did it, but that's what I managed to do. It's possible I need like a Toxic Deluge or something. But for now, I'm not using it. I'm just running more. I'm running a Braid, Bolt, and Fire Ice, and I think that probably will get me there. So anyway, I made those changes after that one, and we move into my next opponent here. A game against Big Butt Bringus. And my hand looks very weak, but it has a very strong combo of Bowmaster's Time Twister. It has a solid Disruption tool in Shaman and Remand. Not great. And it has Mox Opal, which, if you look at my list, is actually no longer in my list. Once again, I keep trying to put it in the deck, thinking, yeah, I want a Mox Opal. I keep taking it out. I don't know. I'm back and forth on it, but it was there for now. So I lead off with Gorilla Shaman into Mox Opal. I'm just going to play it. If my opponent has, like, there's so many reasons why you want to play your stuff in Vintage and just not hide it, hold it. Workshop Go is amazing. Soul Ring off the top is even more amazing. So I'm actually going to attack here. I'm not twisting yet. I've got Remand up and Bowmaster's up. My opponent is going to town. And runs out. That is the One Ring, the ugliest One Ring in existence. So I decide here I'm going to Remand it. And then eat their Mox Jet with my mana left over. And from here I decide, you know what, I'm just going to, let's just see how much damage we can do to my opponent and reload and get the One Ring out of their hand. They have 5 cards. Now they're going to 7. So they draw 2 and take 7 points of damage. I draw 6. Well, my Mox Opal's live now. So in this game, quite good actually, but only because I time twisted. So I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and Mind Twister my opponent afterwards. So I hit Black Lotus, Soul Ring, Tinker, which is just insane. Insanely good, right? Opponent plays their Mox Jet again. And is down to 8, by the way. Plays a Coveted Jewel, gets shot 3 times in the face by Bowmasters. Runs out of Grim. Plays Paradoxical Outcome, gets shot 4 more times by Bowmasters, and concedes. Yeah, that's not going to work too well. You got to deal with the Bowmasters first. Bowmasters are just so gross in Vintage, right? All right, 20 life. 20 life, it's all the difference. It makes so many cards like a lot more interesting. I mean, I'm not running Necro for a reason. I don't have 40 life like I do in Commander. Anyway, so game 2 I sideboard and I have to mulligan here, so I'm going to take a mulligan obviously. And this is very similar to the last hand. I am going second. It looks incredibly slow and risky. And the last thing I want to do is throw away a copy artifact against an opponent like that, but I think maybe it's either copy or leak, right? But I think the play here is I'm going to go land, Bowmasters, Time Twister. So I actually am going to keep the copy artifact because there's always a chance that my opponent turbos out like a Coveted Jewel, and in that case I would love to copy artifact it, right? Fortunately, so I draw a Force of Will here, which makes me feel quite a bit safer. I lead Volcanic, which is a bit risky. I could be stronger to probably just play basic island there. But my opponent's start is just god-awful, right? Look how slow their start is. Alright, Bowmasters are ready to rock and roll. Opponent plays a Saga. Does nothing? Okay, well, let's go. Take a shot to the face. Alright, I'm not going to play that Urborg against a Workshop over there. Let's go for a Twister. My opponent has Force of Will with a Paradoxical Outcome. I have Force of Will back, and then my opponent has Dismember. So this is giving them 4 cards and giving me 5. Not great, but I do find a Black Lotus. Swing in here and pass. I have Spell Pierce, Ancestral Recall, Stifle up, or Opposition Agent, which is pretty good against Urza Saga, by the way. Opponent goes for Karn, so I Ancestral in response. Spell Pierce to just take them off of using the Saga to make a robot. And with the last blue floating, I stifle their ability to grab a card. But they Force a Will, exiling Force a Will, and they grab themselves Mycosynth Lattice. So I'm going to go ahead and take away their Urza Saga and swing in and nip that Karn down to 2. And so they're going to make it so that all my lands are artifacts and all my artifacts have no abilities. In response, though, I'm going to flash out Opposition Agent. I decide that over Ancestral Recall. And my opponent turns an Underground Sea into an artifact and then happens to have just enough mana to copy my Opposition Agent and pay life. Brutal. Kind of wish I had made the Snapcaster Mage, but I swing in for lethal and I hit him for 1 with the Orcish Army. So on my opponent's turn, okay, so let's slow things down. So I swing in for lethal with my 3/2 pause, and I hit them for 1 rather than the Karn. They were so that I drop them from 2 to 1 life, so that I have a lethal attack here. And my opponent, of course, trades with the Phyrexian Metamorph. But this means that they can't tap their Ancient Tombs at all, so these are all dead, unless I were foolish enough to play an Urborg. So they're down to 3, 4, 5, 6 mana, which is basically all they need, but they're also down to only 1 card in hand. And on their turn, the only reason they have the Opal is because Karn was at 3 counters, they minus it in order to grab the Mox Opal. They ran out of like good targets, I guess. But on their turn, to prevent themselves from dying, they're able to play a Workshop Island, the One Ring. So they minus Karn to grab a Mox Opal, and they play the One Ring. I don't know if they realize that the One Ring doesn't protect Karn or what, but what this means is that Karn's at 1 counter. If they don't have a creature they can flash in, I'm going to get access to mana again. So I swing in, Karn dies. Alright, so now I can do things. So I go get a Watery Grave, tinker away an island, which was a bit of a mistake actually. Grab Coveted Jewel once again, and look at that, Bowmaster's off the top. Get shot in the face. Stupid Bowmasters, man. This card's insane. I enjoy the card, honestly. It's just, it makes for... Bowmasters reminds me of Mana Drain. It's a card that each player is like dancing around and has to constantly be aware of. And it's a 2-mana card that can win the game, and it makes for interesting Magic, I gotta say. So anyway, yeah, kind of awesome there. I just thought that was a very fun way. Like, it's not too often that your opponent gets Mycosynth Lattice Karn out against you, and you beat them. But here was a game where it happened. I thought that was very cool. So hopefully you enjoyed those games, and now I'm going to run through a bit of Commander for anyone who's stuck around and is interested. So again, this is the deck list. Coveted Jewel doing some work there. Coveted Jewel Bowmasters. All right, so this is the change to the Bullzot deck, the Teversot Rog deck. Basically, the adjustment is that I went ahead and dropped the little 2/2 shadow creature, the what is he called? The 2-mana 3/2 shadow creature. I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure what the name is. It's a Douthie Voidwalker. There we go. My brain started working again. I dropped the Douthie Voidwalker, and I didn't drop it because it's bad or I don't like it or anything. I just dropped it because I want Paradise Mantle in the deck, I think, and I could not find a spot for the Douthie. And the reason I want Paradise Mantle in the deck is because I think that there are a few too many hands where you have like a bunch of colorless mana, and they're so close, but they're very risky. You're really hoping to draw colored mana. This is just another card that fixes that issue, but also because it's an accelerator, right? It's first turn, Paradise Mantle, equip Rog. Like, if you don't have Curse of Opulence or Guild Artisan or whatever, that's still a fine start. It's an activator for Mox Opal and so on and so forth. So I think it's a pretty good card. One of the things that you can do, for those of you who aren't aware, is you can right-click. Also, by the way, because I've added Bowmasters, NT, Fable, and such, having more creatures in here, which I do now have, as well as the Saga, of course, does make creatures, and the Westvale Abbey does. So because I have more creatures, the Mantle's a lot better than it used to be. A while back, Mantle was mostly a dead card. Mid-game, quite often, unfortunately. Whereas now it has a more higher likelihood of being useful or being looted away to like an NT or a Fable. The other thing, finally, the last reason for the Mantle change is that Mantle is a card you don't mind flipping to Lelia. It's just one more card that you can churn in the machine, right? So it just has all these little synergies, all these nice things about it, and like I said, it's first turn Bird of Paradise here, which is pretty good and anytime you draw it. So one of the things I wanted to show you, if you don't know, you can right click on your deck and you can go to Properties and then choose Sample Hand, and you can see, like, okay, so this would have been probably a keep, and you can even draw another card, you can draw a couple cards, see what you would have drawn, or you can just draw a new hand. You can draw a new hand, you can draw a new hand, and you can just keep doing this, right? So you get an idea of like what kind of hands this deck can draw. And one of the tricks I like to use with this is I just like to do this until I see like a card that I'm testing. Like I'm testing, that was very lucky actually, I'm testing Paradise Mantle, right? So I look at this hand and I say, well, does Paradise Mantle do something for this hand that matters, or is it just not really relevant? And here it's actually a little bit relevant, I think, because I can go first turn Paradise Mantle. So I go Rog, Saga, Mantle, equip Rog. Turn 2, I can play Command Tower. I can then make a Saga token. I could attack with Lelia. I could cast Talisman of Indulgence, tap Rog for black, calling the weak, and then use the Talisman to slam down Tevish and make a couple of dorks, which is probably what I would do. But it gives me all these different, or even I could just go tap 2 mana, Talisman, tap Talisman, Paradise Mantle, and abrade away like a Soul Ring or something. So I didn't plan this. This was completely lucky, but here's a perfect example of where Paradise Mantle would be extraordinary, right? This is a hand where having the ability to flexibly choose between Talisman Commander, Lelia, Saga Token, Talisman Abrade, like there's 4 different sets of plays, and none of those plays are possible without the mantle in this hand right here. So that's kind of awesome, and you can just do that. You can just draw another hand. Oh, here's a different hand, actually, where it's quite good, right? Saga, Mantle, Equip, turn 2, land, Lelia, swing, or whatever, and then turn 3, Artisan, call, or, whatever. So you can just do that and take a look and see what you think. I think that's one interesting way to kind of get a feel for the card. Of course, it doesn't tell the whole story, because some cards are exceptionally good when you draw them and get worse as the game goes on, and other cards are good at all points in the game. And an example of that from Vintage, I'm going to jump back to it and then we'll check out a couple games here. But an example of a card that's extraordinary early and gets worse as the game goes on is Library of Alexandria. It taps to draw a card if you have exactly 7 cards in hand. So obviously, if you're doing these sort of like redraw my opening hand till the card comes up and then decide if the card's good, every time you see Library in your hand, you're going to say, wow, this card's amazing. Well, yeah, of course it is under those conditions. But in the case of Library, it's always a land, so you just play it. You just always play it. But in the case of like Paradise Mantle, it's not necessarily always good. You might draw it and have nothing to equip on it, or be in a situation where equipping is not too helpful. So that will happen, but I think overall the ability to make early hands better is just too good potentially to pass up. I'm quite happy with it. And that brings us to these last couple games here played against the Meek, which will be Commander games. Yeah, excuse me. Normally, if I see non-blue, non-red, like, well, something like this, basically if I see anything green-white in an opponent's deck, if I see one of the commanders is green-white and the other one's not blue, basically, I'm thinking this opponent's probably a pushover. But I happen to know the Meeks actually had a YouTube channel in the past, and I don't know if he's still going to put games out, but you can look for him. But at any rate, a very good player, and treating this opponent like a non-serious opponent. Well, first of all, you should never do that, because your opponents, the second you do that, you're opening the door to losing. Like if you're just sloppy about your play, whatever, this isn't going to be a challenge. It's also disrespectful to the opponent, kind of wastes everybody's time, because if you're not going to play serious and carefully, then what are you even doing? Are you practicing? But secondly, against the Meek in particular, this would be a big mistake, because it's a very strong opponent. So anyway, I've got a great hand though. I'm definitely keeping this. This is a high percentage to win against anybody, because it is Soul Ring, and that's what Soul Ring does. And my opponent goes first turn Magistrate. So, okay, not too pleased, but I do have Molten Collapse. Magistrate into Chrome Mox. I'm printing Toski. Running out Gaddock Teague. So you get an idea. If you're looking at the card quality here, we're talking about Mox, Petal, Dranith, Teague, Toski. We're talking about prison elements, card drawing elements. Like, this is a serious opponent here that means business. The only good thing is I saw him miss a land drop here, and I just ripped like a boss that Mana Crypt off the top. So I'm going to kill Gaddock Teague here, and then that gives me the ability to play my Crypt into Karn and kill my opponent's Mox, which is extremely strong when they're all missing land drops. He's got a mom. Always nice to have a mom. Anyway, and I'm just like in the top decking power mode central over here, so we're just going to run out a bunch of a bunch of threats and get a Fable down. And then we're going to do a little tech play here, and I'm going to see if I can walk my opponent into making a mistake. So he could, excuse me, he could give this pro red and try to chip away at Karn or my face. And I'd love for my opponent to do that, because if they do that, of course, I'm going to tap Karn to untap this 3/3 colorless blocker and kill this thing. So I'm just giving my opponent the opportunity to make a mistake. Of course, if my opponent, for example, has like creature removal, like Swords to Plowshares, and he plows this, then I just protected my Goblin Shaman token, which is a more valuable permanent. So this play here is bait to either get him to like Solitude or plow the Shaku, or screw up by swinging in with the Magistrate. Chance of my opponent doing that is pretty close to 0, though. I mean, like I said, this is a good opponent, but everybody makes mistakes, and I might as well give him a chance to do it. He does not, of course, make a mistake. And instead, we're just going to draw and do gross things. I'm going to throw away that Shattering Spree there and draw an extra card. Swing in for a token. Chooses to block. He's confident he's got his Mother of Runes, that I'm not going to like bolt that thing afterwards or whatever. But as we're all aware over here, we're just going to break him off with a giant Death Cloud. And, you know, hey, I never got to play either of my commanders. This came down on turn 1, so I literally was locked out of my commanders all game. But it doesn't matter if you draw like this. And this is one of the things that's really cool about the Bullseye deck, is that it's just has the ability to win as a complete deck in and of itself without the commander necessarily, though the commander is certainly what the deck's all about. But I mean, it can win games without it, and right there, that was just a devastating victory. So anyway, and then he switches over to this thing. I'm not convinced. Anyway, but I have to mulligan to 4, and I'm going first. So I'm actually down. My opponent has 7, is going to have 8 cards, and I've got to beat him with these 4. Fortunately, it's a pretty exceptional set of cards. So let's hope it's not like turn 1 Swords to Plowshares or Disenchant or something like that. Well, it's not, but it's a pretty nasty turn 1 Sylvan Library off Ramanop. Fortunately, that means I am back. We're back, baby. Necro fixes all. And this mulligan to 4 is just like that, fixed. And I do have Bowmasters. Unfortunately, I can't get them down before he gets to Sylvan. And then my opponent plays this Phyrexian Censor, which is really funky. Each player can't cast more than 1 non-Phyrexian spell each turn. Non-Phyrexian creatures enter the battlefield tapped. That's pretty gnarly prison card. Basically, you can just ignore the non-Phyrexian part for the most part. I'm just going to go with the tap Bowmasters. I'm going to do it now. There's no timing opportunity to trick my opponent with the Sylvan Library. I can wait for him to put Sylvan on the stack, but they don't have to use it, so flashing it out at that point is basically not much different. I go ahead and over Necro for a bit and end up with this hand here. Opponent opts to take the cards. I'm just going to go ahead and shoot him in the face, doubting that my opponent's going to draw another card in their green-white deck and allow me to kill the Censor. But at this point, he decided he had enough against the Necro Bowmasters. Basically, Sylvan Library was pay 10 life, draw 2 cards. Necro is pay 10 life, draw 10 cards. So I don't blame him. I had normally lethal here, so I would Phyrexian Tower away one of my cards, Vampiric Tutor for the combo piece with Lelia, slam Lelia, swing in, and then play, how about all that? Play Tainted Pact and kill my opponent. But with this thing saying that non-Phyrexian creatures in the battlefield tap, and this not being a Phyrexian creature, that wasn't going to work. However, I was still in pretty great shape. I could put a ton of pressure on my opponent. But I actually was not going to Vampiric because there are a number of problems, like I said, with that. First of all, Lelia coming to play tap. Second of all, if I Vampiric Tutor, I don't get the card. I don't have a draw step. I have Necropotence out. So I was just going to be patient here. Oops. Not sure what happened there, but I was just gonna be patient there, and that is really strange. Yeah, I've never seen that happen. So anyway, I was gonna be patient, play a land, attack, put pressure on my opponent, offer them the trade, of course, attack them, get a gold counter, not swing in with the Bowmasters, of course. Run out some extra artifact mana, play a tapped Lelia, more than likely. Necro for some more. I could get my commander down eventually, but not a huge rush. When I've got Necro running. God, the yawning. I think that means it's time for me to call it, folks. But hopefully you enjoyed watching the Vintage Singleton deck beat up on some fair vintage, some proper vintage decks. It's a fair vintage decks against unfair ones, and getting those wins is always satisfying. And then hopefully you enjoyed the Commander games as well. And once again, I'll show you the Vintage Singleton. I strongly recommend, and hope that you take an interest. I definitely recommend giving it the format a shot. Honestly, it's really fun to play. Somebody asked me if there were any other decks you can build besides basically the one I'm building, and the answer is 100% yes. Of course, I'm trying to perfect this Grixis control deck, or maybe Grixis Splash White control deck, because I like to play control. But first of all, this could be a pure combo deck. I do have the Time Twister in here so that I can do some stuff with Hull Breacher and Narset or Orcish Bowmasters, because at that point, why wouldn't I? But it's not a pure combo deck here. You could run like Wheel of Fortune, Thassa's Oracle, and all that jazz. So that's one route you could take that would be similar to this deck, but definitely not the same deck. Like I said, that's one route. But another route you could go is you could absolutely run something along the lines of green, red, blue would be extremely good, where Time Walk becomes very, very scary. Imagine running a deck with like Minsk and Boo, and you've got access to Fast Bond and Channel and Wheel of Fortune and Time Twister and all that good stuff. So you could run something along those lines. Very aggressive, very scary, lots of damage coming at your opponent ultra quickly, with probably a ton of artifact removal and some really good anti-blue sideboard cards. And then just touching blue for a couple of key cards, like maybe you run, Ancestral Time Walk, maybe Dak Faden, Fire Ice, like a couple cards. You wouldn't need much, right? That would be a way you could go as well, just thinking about it off the top of my head. I'm sure that an Oath of Druids deck would work in this format. I'm sure that Prison would work in the format. I think Bant would be really good, potentially. But it's just a very different deck style, and I haven't gotten around to building them, and I would be interested in building some of these other decks and perhaps playing them, but I'm really hoping to get some opponents for the format. So anyway, if you're interested in seeing some stuff like that, maybe put something together and come play. It's a lot of fun, and I keep saying that, but and I think people will recognize that, but I don't know, maybe it's an intimidating format, or you're worried you're not going to have an opponent. I'm on all the time. Well, I'm on a lot. I'm definitely on every week, so that I could potentially be an opponent. If you'd like to add me as a friend, look for me. You can send me a message or whatever. You can also post your screen name in the comments if you want to play, and I'll add you as a friend so that we can play. So that's one way you could go. And then alternately, if people are posting in the comments screen names that want to play the format, well, everyone's name in the format is saying, hey, I want to play. I'm sure they don't just want to play me. So y'all could start creating pair-ups and then, give the format a shot. Of course, we can't play Chaos Orb. It's not legal online. It's not available online. But we can play everything else. And I think it'd be super fun and interesting, and you should try it if you also think so. But that's all I've got for now. Thank you very much for watching. I look forward to your thoughts, and I'll see you next time.